Hey, biggin'. Playtime's over.
Just like with Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4 is quite an unpopular Pixar sequel, which I found myself liking nonetheless. Whilst I will concede that it does have very clear flaws, there's equally a lot here that I appreciate, and I'd say that this was ultimately a way better film than Incredibles 2, because not only was it enjoyable, I also found its ideas way more interesting. But just like with the other flawed films at this point on the list, I'll cover the issues that everyone else has first, so I can then end by talking about why I still like the film. First things first, Buzz is a complete moron in this movie, and I hate him. I know he's always been a little bit dense, but never to the extent that he relies on his voice box for advice. It's so dumb. Oh well, at least he was actually in the movie, unlike the other side characters who were completely sidelined. I mean, I do like how much focus Woody gets as a character, but I do kinda miss the side peeps like Jessie, Rex, and Slinky. Another big issue with this movie which people often like to meme on is the fact that it's stupid that Bonnie doesn't give a shit about Woody anymore. The reason for why this is such an issue is because this, more than anything, severely undercuts 3's ending. I mean, this film's mere existence kinda undercuts 3, but this plot point is the main kicker. Andy poured his heart out onto Bonnie, and asked her to promise to take special care of Woody. And what does Bonnie do? She abandons him for months, and in her mind, she lost him at an amusement park. Great. Now yes, I know kids are assholes and their preferences towards toys vary, so it's understandable why she would go from loving Woody one minute to preferring her other toys. But still, it just feels awkward in the context of this franchise. I think it may have worked better if we had another time jump with an older Bonnie, as it would make more sense why her feelings have changed, because as it stands, it's just bizarre that she would go from loving Woody in 3 in the shorts, to not caring about him a year or so later. And once again, I just feel bad for poor old Andy. So yeah, the character stuff is probably the biggest crime this film commits, and I can see why someone may hate the overall package as a result of that. Although there are admittedly some other flaws with this film as well, but they're not as major for me. For example, I don't particularly like Randy Newman's score for this movie. The new original songs are great as usual, but the score itself is definitely suffering from the same issue that a lot of other legacy sequels have. It's trying too hard to be a greatest hits medley, which means that the tracks don't feel as organic as they should do. Now granted, this film is definitely no Rise of Skywalker, so the tracks are never horrendous, but I did still find them quite off. And finally, I do think that the pacing is a little bit weak here, particularly around the middle when the gang are just trying to get Forky back. This may have been due to the fact that the plot can sometimes be a bit too thin and low stakes, but I definitely wouldn't say that this film's boring though, as I still enjoy myself on the whole. So yeah, those are all the things that I took issue with whilst watching this film. But I still really liked everything else. I mean, first of all, aesthetically speaking, this movie's gorgeous. Now, I am definitely more of a fan of stylized animation over hyperrealism, but I can still appreciate this film as good hyperrealism. I think it's the lighting and the colours of places like the antique shop or the carnival which really do it for me. This is just such a pretty movie at so many points. I also really love the new characters here. Yes, I still would have liked to have seen more of the older characters who we all know and love, but I didn't mind their presence as much, as I still love these new faces. Not only is it great to see Bo Peep make a return after she was absent in 3, and it's also great seeing her as an actual character rather than just Woody's sex doll, but this movie also stars the legend that is Forky, who's the best character in the movie, no question. I probably shouldn't relate to him as much as I do. And alongside them, we've also got Ducky and Bunny, who are my spirit animals. Just like with Forky, they have some banger jokes, and it's also pretty novel that they're played by Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele. I never would have expected that duo in a Pixar film, but it's great. I really like that subplot where Bunny surprised everyone by making one of the best modern horror movies. That was really cool. And finally, I can't not talk about Canada's greatest stuntman, Duke Kaboom, played by Keanu Reeves, the GOAT. Okay, I should clarify that I do love characters like Duke Kaboom beyond just their voice actors. I think he's really funny and endearing, and he had a really cool moment at the end. And same with Ducky and Bunny, I love them beyond just the voice actors. They're great. But Gabby Gabby was probably the most interesting character for me, because she was sort of an anti-villain. Like, yeah, she started out antagonistic, but she's equally really sympathetic and actually goes through a well-realized and deserved redemption. I liked her, and the ending where she comforted the lost child was just beautiful. It truly understood why toys are so important within this franchise, and it linked in well to Woody's decision to become a lost toy by the end. And that leads me on nicely to my main positive with the film. I really love the bold, unique ideas and messages that this film presents. Toy Story 4 is so alienating for audiences because it was supposed to be alienating, as on the surface, its main ideas appear to go against what the previous film set up, but deep down, they mean a lot more. The previous films lean heavily into the idea that a toy should be loyal to their kid no matter what, and this idea is brought up in this film too. But then, it challenges that idea. When your main kid grows up and the replacement doesn't care, what do you actually owe them? That's what Woody has to come to terms with. Should he remain loyal to Bonnie even though he contributes nothing? Or should he move on in order to make more of a difference in the world? This movie basically shows to the audience that the status quo you normally expect can and will change, which means that things which worked for you in the past won't necessarily work for you now. It's a really fascinating idea, and it's one which I can connect to quite a lot as I get older. Things change, and everything has to end sometimes. Otherwise, nothing would ever get started. Seeing Woody have to grapple with this difficult realization after so many years of sticking to his old beliefs is something which I find really compelling. But I do understand why this can be a bit of a hard pill for some to swallow whilst watching this movie. As I said, it was designed to alienate the audience, as it's something you wouldn't expect from a movie like this. But I think it still works really well nonetheless. I think it makes sense why Woody would leave behind a life of neglect in order to be with the one he loves, making children happy. I personally love the resolution to this film, as I think that it feels earned in its own unique way. Now yes, I still have issues with some of the factors which led to this resolution, like Bonnie's neglect, but the end result is still satisfying for me. Maybe if there was more of a time skip it would all click that little bit better, but alas, I love what this film is going for, and whilst I understand some of the hate, these compelling ideas are equally something which I will happily defend. So overall, I really like Toy Story 4 because I find its ideas really compelling and honestly quite impactful. But even outside of that, the film is still really gorgeous and just as entertaining as all the other Toy Story movies. But it is still the weakest of the franchise, largely because some of the characterization is a bit off. However, I do still enjoy this film overall. It deserved a nomination for sure, but I wouldn't say that it deserved to win the Oscar, even if it is still a good movie on the whole. And I can't wait for Toy Story 5 to ruin this ending as well. Yay!
This is a local shop for local people! There's nothing for you here!
Let me tell you, I was not expecting to enjoy Elemental as much as I did. I just assumed that it would be the same generic modern Disney crap that we've got too many of at the moment. I mean, the marketing didn't exactly do it any favours after all. As a result, I was more than content with avoiding this movie as much as possible. But then I had to watch it for this video, and so I stuck it on reluctantly, and actually enjoyed myself. Whilst not a perfect movie in any way, I surprisingly got a lot out of it, and I'm really happy they ended up giving it a chance in the end. I think the main thing which was turning me off from this movie for a while was the fact that it looked like a really generic romance story. But it was actually a lot more than that. Now granted, it does unfortunately fall into a few of the annoying romance movie cliches by its end, but for the most part, I actually found the main relationship between Wade and Ember to be pretty sweet on the whole. Nowadays, I admittedly have a bit of a soft spot for really simple yet endearing romance stories like this, where the relationship isn't exactly complex and the love kind of boils down to two characters just being nice to each other. But I like that, okay? There's too much negativity and toxic relationships in this world. It's nice to see one which is actually enjoyable to watch and ultimately ends in a happy way, in spite of the slightly unnecessary breakup which was thrown in. Some scenes which particularly stood out to me were the cave exploring one, the scene on the balloon, and the part where Wade and Ember finally made contact. These were all just nice moments which helped this film to feel really damn charming on the whole. But I do also have another reason for why I like the main relationship. But please bear with me as I talk about it, as I recognise that this reason is a bit of a stretch. But just hear me out, okay? You see, I got a lot of enjoyment out of seeing Ember and Wade express their love for each other in their own unique way, which still works despite being different to other expected relationships. This was shown brilliantly in that one scene with the candle, where Wade was able to find his own unconventional way to light it, and this shows that he's still a good fit for Ember in spite of being of a different element. Their relationship isn't the status quo, but it works because they make it work. The reason for why I like this is because I connected with it in my own asexual way. Yeah, I actually started to see this film as ace. Kinda. Whilst Wade and Ember can be intimate with each other, it's clearly not as comfortable for them as it would be for 2 fire people for instance. Yet they don't mind and they're still able to make their love work. Their relationship extends beyond intimacy. And that's why I started to see this film as ace. Now yes, I know that this was probably not intentional. This is a family film after all. I fully understand why they wouldn't leave ace undertones, because kids do not need to worry about that for obvious reasons. But it doesn't change the fact that this personal rating that I got out of the film led to me enjoying the experience more, and I think that's still important to bring up. personal readings to a film are still valid, even if they weren't intended by the creatives. In the wise words of the ace icon known as Todd,
"But isn't the point of art less what people put into it and more what people get out of it?"
So yeah, I enjoyed this film a lot because of personal readings which probably weren't intentional. But there's still plenty of good things here which were definitely meant to be read into. Outside of the main romance, the thing which I appreciated the most about this movie was its main ideas related to immigration, something which I was not expecting before watching. But honestly, it was really interesting to see. Basically, this film does a great job at showing how disconnected some immigrant groups can feel from the rest of the country they're in, because of differences in culture and whatnot. In the case of this film, the Element Society isn't really accommodating for fire people, which means that Ember's family don't fit in as well. However, this joint feeling of placelessness ended up spurring the fire people on to essentially create their own ethnic enclave. Basically, ethnic enclaves are areas in cities and whatnot which largely consist of minority groups, particularly from immigrant families, and they're created to make a community feel more at home within an environment which accommodates them more. Examples of places like this include the many different Chinatowns, as well as this area of London called Brick Lane, which houses a lot of Bangladeshi residents. The local culture is designed to accommodate those with Bangladeshi roots, whether it's through local cuisine or easy accessibility to the place of worship. It stands out from the rest of London as being its own unique community of people who are able to make those from a similar background feel more welcome. It's a really interesting place actually. I had to go there for Geography A-level stuff and it was really cool. And, as a bonus, learning about this was very useful in helping me understand what Elemental was going for in its themes of immigration. This fire neighborhood is basically the Brick Lane of Element City, and that's just a really cool, creative idea for a film like this. But this idea of an ethnic enclave also links in well to Bernie's character, I feel, as I think it helps us to understand why he's less trusting of other elements like Wade. He spent his whole life dealing with prejudice and difficulties for being fire, and that made him feel like he had to open his local shop for local people in order to carve out his own community separate from the rest of the city. That makes complete sense, however because of this, he doesn't want to mix with other elements as he's had bad experiences in the past. It's a reasonable motivation and makes him a much more interesting character, when he could have so easily fallen into the stubborn dad stereotype. However, whilst I do appreciate a lot of the immigration themes here, I will still say that I do find some parts of the race allegories a bit strange. Like, the whole elements don't mix idea feels off to me, because in the context of this world, the elements don't mix because they often harm each other. It's less so a matter of prejudice, and more so safety, which feels more reasonable to me. But if it's a race allegory, it shouldn't feel reasonable at all. I mean, I suppose the allegory kinda works, as Wade and Ember can still safely hold hands in spite of what people previously believed, so maybe things do boil down to prejudice rather than safety, but I don't know, it still feels strange, and I can't exactly find much justification for why the characters had to be elements rather than just people, outside of the fact that it makes the story and world a bit more fun and memorable. And on the topic of some things which didn't really work for me about this movie, some parts of the plot were a bit off. I mean, I already went over how I didn't like the breakup scene as it made the final act a bit messy, but there are also some weird things related to the main leak. Like, how did it start? Why did no one bother to fix it earlier? And why was the glass deemed safe to contain it even though it definitely wasn't? Honestly, the leak just felt more like a plot device designed to move the story along, rather than a realistic part of the film's world. And the final major issue which I want to bring up here is the fact that the jokes can sometimes be a bit hit and miss. There's definitely some funny moments with Ember here and there, but there's also a lot of strange jokes, and Claude just sucks as a character. I hate that little shit. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up this segment with my final major positive to counteract the negativity. I'll be honest, I just really like Ember as a character. Her fiery personality and short fuse of annoying customers was incredibly relatable and entertaining for me, and I just got her, you know? Also, is it bad that the first thing I thought of after Ember exploded in the shop was that scene from Betty Blue where Betty stabbed the annoying customer with a fork? I never thought I'd think of French art house movies in relation to Pixar movies, but yeah, here we are. This is why I love being an equal fan of all different kinds of cinema. Anywho, alongside getting enjoyment out of Ember's temper, I also related to her in an artist way. I really like the subplot where she realised how much she wants to do glass blowing, yet feels stuck at the shop while she helps her father. It's an interesting personal conflict and was a plotline which I really connected with. And alongside that, it was honestly Wade's support for Ember's passion in these scenes which made me like the couple as much as I did. It was honestly just really nice of him to show his support while she had her doubts. It showed that he was good to her. Admittedly, Wade isn't as interesting of a character for me as Ember was, but he's still a nice guy so I don't really mind. Overall, I got a lot more out of Elemental than I expected to. I connected with it as both an ace and a wannabe artist, and I also appreciated how much this story likely connected with those from immigrant families. It's got a lot of interesting ideas and a nice main relationship, and whilst I wouldn't say that everything was flawlessly executed, the stuff which worked for me was really nice. So yeah, I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. It's flawed, but really enjoyable for me. I would honestly recommend it, and I'm glad that it was nominated solely because it gave me an excuse to watch it. Although, I do still admittedly prefer TMNT Mutant Mayhem.
I like turtles!
Out of all of the big animation studios which are predominantly featured within this list, I can safely say that my favourite is easily Studio Ghibli. Or is it pronounced Ghibli? I don't actually know. Let me check. Okay, so apparently both ways are kind of correct to some extent. So I'm just gonna say Ghibli as I prefer the way that it sounds. Anyway, Ghibli is just one of the most beautiful animation studios out there, and they are responsible for some of the greatest animated movies of all time. But even outside of their iconic masterpieces, the studio remains as easily the most consistently fantastic, prolific animation studio out there, as I can literally count on one hand the number of their films which are considered to be duds, and their consistent quality can very clearly be shown through their list of nominations on this list. Whilst Disney, Pixar and DreamWorks have all had their fair share of stinkers which I've spoken about earlier, the weakest Ghibli film on this list, in my opinion, is The Red Turtle, which is still good at the end of the day. And to be fair, it doesn't even count as a proper Ghibli film as it was actually a co-production with a French studio. So yeah, if you don't want to count this, then we haven't even reached the weakest Ghibli film yet, and we won't for a while. But anyway, going back to The Red Turtle, I thought that it was a good movie on the whole. It was very well made and it had a lot of interesting stuff about it. But I just couldn't get into it, and I've kinda already spoken about why. The thing is, my problems with this movie perfectly parallel my problems with The Illusionist. Both films are dialogueless films, and they both struggle to engage me because I couldn't read into them very well, because the lack of dialogue felt very unnatural to me, which thus made it harder for me to understand the hidden themes of the films. It all just felt very alien to me. Although to be fair, I only really started to take issue with the Red Turtle's presentation by its second half, whereas I actually got on well with the first half. You see, the first half of this film plays out like a typical Castaway story. A man is stranded on an island and he wants to escape, but he can't because the titular Red Turtle keeps destroying his raft. Honestly, this part of the movie was actually really engaging for me. I enjoyed watching this man try to survive on this island before he eventually became more and more frustrated with his situation over time, to the point that he acted out and unjustly killed the turtle. This was all great stuff, and it wasn't hindered by the lack of dialogue for me, because it was just one man on an island, and so he didn't really need to say anything, as he wasn't interacting with others. It just felt like a natural way to avoid dialogue. Oh, and just so I don't forget to mention it later, whilst this movie may not be as gorgeous as the main Ghibli films, I still really like the animation here throughout. So yeah, all was going well for me in this movie, and then the turtle, for some reason, became a woman, and the dude then proceeded to fuck it to the point they eventually had a kid with it. My guy, it's a turtle! I know it looks like a woman, but I can't shake off the feeling that this man birthed a child with a turtle. What kind of Shape of Water spin-off is this? Okay, I'm exaggerating my feelings about this weird birth for comedic effect. I didn't actually care too much. In actuality, the reason for why I stopped connecting with this movie is because it just goes completely off the rails by its second half, to the point that nothing made sense anymore. Like seriously, I don't get this film. The man got with the lady turtle and stopped caring about escaping, and then his son was running around for a bit, and then the tsunami hit, and then the man and the turtle died of old age, and I'm sorry, what the hell's going on here? Okay, so it's pretty clear to me that this story is a metaphor. It's not meant to be taken seriously. After doing some googling, I discovered that this film is apparently meant to be a metaphor for long-term satisfaction, with the man settling on the island with a family instead of trying to escape. Alright, I can kinda see that, I guess, but it still doesn't work for me for one main reason. I found the film kinda boring, as by the second half, the pace slowed to an absolute crawl as nothing really happened. This film was definitely weird, but it wasn't David Lynch levels of weird, so I wasn't really that engaged by the weirdness. For me, most of the movie went in one ear and out the other, and all I felt was confusion. It just didn't really grab me. Although, I do think that this film could have worked a lot better for me, if it was a short film rather than a feature. And believe me, this is not going to be the first time I will say this in relation to one of these art house movies. If this was a 40-minute short, I'd probably be more likely to get into it in spite of its metaphorical elements, because it won't bore me as much. However, it's 80 minutes long, and its thin plot was stretched out way too far, to the point that I kinda stopped caring at a point. But alongside the inflated runtime, I think this film spent way too long on the castaway stuff, and not enough time on the metaphorical elements. Now, I know I said that the castaway stuff was my favourite part of the film, but the time spent on it actually ended up leading to me feeling unsure of what my mindset was supposed to be for this film. By the time I reached the halfway point, I just assumed that this was a simple, immersive movie which you could just kind of vibe with. But then suddenly, the second half demanded that I paid attention to all the little details just so I could understand the bare bones of what was going on, and I'm just not in that right mindset because the film seemed to guide me away from how I was supposed to feel. Do you get what I mean? I don't know if that made any sense or not. TLDR, I didn't understand this film, and I also didn't know that it was going to pull some metaphorical art house experience on me, because the first half was something completely different. Oh, and as for the dialogueless nature of the film, which I mentioned at the start of this segment, it stopped working for me by this film's second half because it just felt kind of awkward now that there were multiple characters who should have been interacting with each other, yet they just weren't, and that just felt strange to me. But, in spite of everything, I still admittedly appreciate this film quite a bit. As I said, I really liked the first half, the animation was very nice, and I do think that the metaphorical elements are most likely strong, but just not really for me. And that's okay. I can definitely see why someone may adore this film. Normally I would say that this film at least deserved its nomination, but in terms of weird movies on the 2016 shortlist where the Japanese had a hand in making it, Your Name is way better and it's not even close. And with all that said, let's move on to something simpler which I can actually talk about confidently without confusion.
Here we have the missing link.
Do you want to know something about me? I really like globe-trotting stories. I can't really explain why they gel with me so much, they just kinda do. My best guess is that I find them appealing because I really enjoy seeing a wide variety of different locations within stories, as they're usually able to keep things fresh and visually interesting over a runtime. Plus, it's just really cool to see different places from around the world in a short space of time, because the environments can differ greatly and it's really fun to compare them all. And on the whole, I just find grand adventures around the world to be really fun more than anything. And one writer who I think appeals to my interest greatly in relation to this is Jules Verne, particularly with his iconic novel Around the World in 80 Days. To me, this is a hella charming story which I get a ton of enjoyment out of no matter how it's interpreted. I love the Michael Palin documentary travelogue which followed the route of the book, I love the BBC miniseries with David Tennant which adapted the book in a slightly looser but still fun and engaging way, and I even love the original 1956 film adaptation. Contrary to what others say, I don't think that this movie's boring at all. I think it's really fun, charming, and so gorgeous. Plus, it features Buster Keaton making a cameo as a train conductor, which is pretty epic. So, with all of that being said, it's hardly a surprise that I really enjoyed Missing Link, seeing as it is a very clear homage to the works of Jules Verne, particularly Around the World in 80 Days. I mean, this film is literally about a British guy going on a grand adventure across the globe to achieve some goal while some other people try to stop him. That's literally just the plot of Around the World in 80 Days. Even though Lionel Frost doesn't travel across the whole world like Phileas Fogg did, the basic idea is still the same, even if the motivations are different. Either way, Missing Link does a great job at appealing to all of my preferences when it comes to globetrotting stories. The adventure feels grand, the film looks consistently gorgeous, I mean it's stop motion, what do you expect? It's consistently engaging thanks to the wide variety of different locations, and as a whole, the film is really fun and charming. However, I didn't personally like it as much as the works that it was inspired by, and this is largely because of the character drama. Now, I like Lionel Frost as the protagonist. He's got British wit and charm and is a delight to follow no matter how self-centered he may sometimes be. Although, I do have to say, I spent the whole movie thinking that Frost was played by Ralph Fiennes. I only found out whilst editing that I've been pronouncing his name wrong my entire life. His name is Ray Fiennes, not Ralph Fiennes, even though it's spelt like Ralph, it's Ray Fiennes. I won't make that mistake in future, I promise. Only to learn at the very end that he was, in fact, Hugh Jackman, an Australian. Well, I guess I can safely say that from my British perspective, Jackman nailed the accent. It certainly sounded way more natural than his stupid Elvis voice from Happy Feet. Anyway, back to my main point. Whilst I did get a lot of enjoyment out of Frost, his character stuff began to falter for me when Adelina got introduced, and this is because of one fact. Adelina is a character who is simultaneously always in the right, but is also really annoying. You see, she spends the whole movie calling out Frost for being an arsehole to both her and Susan Link. Yet that's all she does! At many points it feels like she only existed to tell the audience that Frost is a flawed character who needs to change. But at the same time, she doesn't have a character of her own. She doesn't have flaws herself, we have no idea what her past relationship with Frost is, as it's only told to us, and she's just not entertaining to watch. I just don't like characters who moan all the time without being entertaining in their own right, and that doesn't change even if the character in question has a right to complain. It's still annoying to watch as an audience member, and it just really takes me out of the fun that the movie was aiming for. If you want to see this main character conflict done well, just watch Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Puss and Kitty's dynamic is literally just Frost and Adelina's dynamic from this movie, but way, way better, and that's because both Puss and Kitty have their own flaws which they develop from. Not to mention, their back and forth rivalry and disagreements are, you know, funny and not annoying. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of one of the big three main characters here, which is a bit of a problem I think it's fair to say. Luckily, Frost and Susan are much more enjoyable to watch. I kinda wish the whole movie was just them two, to be honest. Oh, and on the topic of characters, the villains are really forgettable as well. I legitimately can't remember their names or anything they did. Anyway, I hate to complain so much about this movie because I did still really enjoy it. The locations were fun, the animation was gorgeous, and the action, oh man, the action was fantastic. The bar fight in San Francisco was cool, although it really would have benefited from Frank Sinatra on the piano if you know what I mean. The climax of the Himalayas was incredibly tense, and I really loved how bonkers that ship fight got. Like, this scene went for the full Inception rotating corridor madness, and I loved it for that. It was a really unique action scene. And alongside the journey itself being really fun, I really liked the ending where Susan said screw you to the Yetis who shunned him. That was certainly a cathartic end to this film. So overall, Missing Link is simple but really fun for me. If you're not as into these kinds of stories, this movie probably won't mean much for you, as outside of its adventure, it hasn't got much else going for it because the aforementioned character stuff isn't amazing. But I still had fun with this film. I just wish that I could have had more fun with it, but whatever, I guess Gamora's moaning was seen as more important. Oh well, still a good movie, definitely didn't deserve to flop as much as it did, although I will admit that it probably would be ranked lower if I didn't love globetrotting stories.
Ah, the French.
The Triplets of Belleville is yet another prime example of a film which just simply isn't for me. It is definitely not a bad or mediocre movie by any means, and I totally understand why it's a cult classic for many people. However, for me, personally, it is just not my cup of tea at all. Well, for the most part it wasn't my thing, but eventually it started to work for me, but we'll get to that later. Although, in contrast to the other movies I spoke about, which are quite low-key yet still thematically rich, this film is weird and wacky and off the wall, and you are doing yourself a great disservice if you actually try to follow what's going on, like I did whilst watching. I mean, I suppose there's a vague story here about a bloke getting kidnapped by the Mafia on the Tour de France before his grandmother goes to rescue him. However, that's kinda it story-wise, as after the grandmother arrives in Belleville, she just sort of vibes with the titular triplets for most of the movie, whilst the grandson is forced to fake pedal in front of a screen for the Mafia for some reason. Yeah, I have no idea what the hell was going on or what all of it meant. I heard online that apparently the main theme of the movie is revolved around entertainment becoming more artificial over time, and I suppose I can kinda see that as the dude is fake cycling instead of doing it for real. But I don't know why the mob had to get involved with this whole thing, like what the hell, that's just really random. As a result of this strange plot, I feel like this film shares a lot more similarities with something like Eraserhead or something. It's got things which you definitely can read into it, but really, you just need to go along with its wacky vibe and try not to figure it out, because that's really not the point. Although, in saying that, I definitely did still notice the anti-Disney undertones of this film. There's some cheeky references here and there, and this film's mere existence just goes against what Disney usually creates due to its sheer weirdness, so I guess it works perfectly as that anti-Disney tonic we all probably need right now. But still, that was all I could really take away from this film. The rest was just bizarre nonsense. However, whilst I did eventually vibe with this movie by its end, not enough actually happened for me to remain engaged throughout the entire runtime. Just like with the Red Turtle, there were way too many moments which were really slow, uneventful, and dull for me, which meant that I found it even harder to actually get into this film. For example, it took like 20 to 30 minutes for the plot to actually start, and even when it gets going, there's large stretches of the runtime where the grandma just vibes with the triplets with not much else really going on at all, as I previously mentioned. For me personally, I didn't find the first half all that entertaining, as it wasn't weird or funny and was just kinda uneventful and boring. The only truly memorable and entertaining thing to come out of these long scenes for me was Bruno, who was an absolute MVP. I mean, this dog literally swam across an entire ocean, acted as a wheel for a broken truck, and he never failed to bark at the oncoming trains. What a champ. I love this doggo. Although, I do find it funny that this anti-Disney movie has a character called Bruno. How come no one talks about that? Although, I will say that my only problem with Bruno is the fact that he kept having these really pointless nightmare sequences which didn't really amount to anything. However, I probably only took issue with them because I always like to derive meaning out of everything. But as I said, some films like this are just made to be quirky and weird without deeper meaning behind it, and that's totally fine. I just prefer reading into themes, you know? So yeah, it's apparent that I struggled to fully get on board with this movie, particularly in its first half. However, there were still plenty of things besides Bruno that I enjoyed here. First of all, the music was great and every scene which was all about the music was just brilliant, from the opening TV performance to the later one on the stage which used the household appliances as instruments. I also appreciated the lack of dialogue a lot more here than in Illusionist or The Red Turtle, as the plot was less important and more weird, which means that the dialogue didn't feel needed for me to fully understand what the film was going for. Plus, it allowed the music to truly shine here. And finally, I actually really like the animation for this film. I know everyone likes to talk about how creepy and weird it can be, but honestly, that's kind of the appeal of it for me. It fits with the quirky nature of the film, and I just loved the character designs, particularly the main guy and his massive nose. I can definitely see what the Simpsons parodied there. I hated his legs though, they really grossed me out. And alongside the main man, I also loved the look of these two agents, as they were basically just this massive wall with two heads. It was great. Oh, and some of the background characters looked really funky as well. I loved them. Honestly, as a whole, the quirkiness of the film makes it quite humorous throughout, particularly in the second half when things start to become more and more weird. That's when this film starts to truly entertain me, even if I still don't fully get it, as stuff is actually happening. Even if the stuff in question is really weird, it's still something compared to all the really slow scenes when nothing happens. And this all leads in well to the final act of this film, which is honestly a masterpiece of an ending. Seriously, I struggled to get into this film for the most part, however I thought that the final act was absolutely legendary, from that shootout to the whole freaking car chase. Maybe I enjoyed it so much because the film was actually following a story by this point, as the cyclists escape and the mob chase after them, but I honestly think that the simple reason for why it worked for me is because it was so much fun. This was what all the quirkiness was building up towards, and I couldn't be happier, as this final chase is one of the most off-the-wall and bonkers endings I have ever seen, and I had an absolute blast with it from start to finish. My favourite part of this sequence was when the baby in the pram completely totaled one of the mob's cars. I legit laughed out loud when that happened, because it was so unexpected and goofy. I also loved the part where the frickin' bazooka was pulled out. Okay, it's not as good as the scene in Four Lions, but it's still pretty close. Oh, and I also loved the very ending where the grandmother used her weird shoe to somehow trip up the final car, which caused it to fall into a passing boat smokestack. What? That's just amazing. Early in the film, the shoe definitely caught my attention because it looked quite weird, but I was pleasantly surprised when it actually became important later on for a brilliant payoff. It was just a perfect usage of Chekhov's shoe. So yeah, the ending really elevated the film for me. I still wouldn't say that the film overall was my cup of tea, as it was a bit random for my taste and I found some parts quite dull. However, the off-the-wall nature of the film did nonetheless elevate it in my mind, as it made the film really entertaining, particularly by the ending. And this entertainment is the main reason why I preferred this film to Illusionist in terms of the Sylvain Chomet movies on this list. I definitely understood Illusionist a lot more, however I equally found it a bit forgettable. The Triplets of Belleville, however, is anything but forgettable. Not every part of it works for me, and I'm not going to pretend like it's my thing entirely. However, it was often extremely fun, and the weird, quirky nature of the film made it a memorable one for sure. I totally understand why people love this film, and I definitely think that's worth checking out. Especially if you love weird cinema.
Who is your favorite fearless hero?
Puss in Boots? The first one. Oh, come on, surely you all know that one. I mean, it's the one that Francis watched in the Paris cinema.
Hello. When did Puss in Boots start?
That must mean it's significant, right? Like, Greta Gerwig likes Puss in Boots. Okay, all things considered, that one clip from Francis Ha is probably the most amount of cultural relevance that this movie has had, alongside the memes about Humpty Dumpty's face and the twist with him which came straight out of Saw 3D. As, let's be honest here, basically no one talks about this movie for any other reason. Well, no one besides me, that is. Yeah, in case you don't know, I've actually already talked about this film in way more detail than I probably needed to in my Puss in Boots retrospective from 2023, and honestly, I'm just going to direct you towards that video if you want my full thoughts, as I really don't have anything new to add here. Although with that said, there is one thing which I want to amend from that old video. I have absolutely no idea why I said before that this movie didn't have any innuendos in it. I must have been either really stupid, really innocent, or more racist than usual that day to be completely unaware of the amount of sexual tension present between Puss and Kitty within this movie. I mean, just listen to some of these lines. Frisky 2 times, the furry lover. Come on, how did I not pick up on that? Anyway, apart from that major oversight on my end, my opinions on this movie have stayed pretty much the same, so as a result, I'll just go through my overall thoughts really quickly here. In short, I still like this movie a lot in spite of its many flaws. These flaws include a slightly messy final act and a disappointingly short main adventure. However, these flaws are more than undercut for me in favour of the many positives that I have with this film. I mean, the adventure is still fun despite being short, the music's great, I like how much this movie made an effort to stand out from the other Shrek movies, and, most of all, I love Puss in Boots and Kitty Softpaws so much. They are honestly some of my favourite characters ever. Their dynamic is literally perfect, no notes. I am obsessed with their playful flirtatious banter. It's so good, honestly. On the whole, I'd say that I am still able to have a really fun time with this movie, even nowadays in spite of the existence of its vastly superior sequel. However, I will still admit that this movie does look really cursed animation-wise in comparison to its sequel. Like, this movie looks like a completely standard movie, which is so off in comparison to the amazing style which I'm now used to. Oh well, it's no biggie at the end of the day. I'd say that overall, my nostalgic love for this movie is largely the reason for why it's ranked so high on this list. To be honest, now that I think about it, how I feel about this movie is very similar to how a lot of other people feel about Bolt. Both films are cute, harmless fun which have been biased in the minds of various people thanks to nostalgia. However, I like Puss in Boots a lot more than Bolt, because Puss in Boots was the film which I rewatched all the time as a kid, in comparison to Bolt which I only saw a few times. Oh, and it probably also helps that I'm more of a cat person, so I'm just naturally more drawn to the movie about the cats, rather than the one about the dog. So yeah, this movie's got quite a lot of nostalgia bias for me, but I don't care. I love it and I won't stop loving it, even if I still have issues with it. Anyway, I won't say any more here as this ranking is long enough as is. I may as well just save my time by moving right along to some other films which I haven't talked about in as much detail. Just go and watch my other video for more detailed thoughts on Puss in Boots 1.
I've got a sneaky feeling you'll find that love actually is all around.
How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World is a movie where my feelings towards it are quite complicated to say the least, and I honestly have no idea whether anything I'm about to say will be controversial or not, because I still don't know what the general feelings towards this movie are. Is it loved or is it hated? I honestly still don't know. But whatever, I don't care what others think. This is my opinion, so I'll just say what I need to say. So, I have complicated feelings towards The Hidden World because it's one of the only films which I can think of which I've seen recently, which I would say has actually gotten significantly weaker in my mind the more that I think about it. And usually films get better for me, so this is quite a significant outlier. You see, I first watched this film in 2023 and I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was a perfect finale to the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, a trilogy which I absolutely loved watching at that time. Whilst I definitely knew that there were critics of this movie, I didn't really care about what they had to say as I still personally loved it. But then, I rewatched the film for this video, and it really didn't hold up as well for me, and now I'd easily consider it to be the weakest movie in the franchise by a landslide. Somehow, it managed to drop from being a fantastic movie for me, to being just a good movie. I mean, to be fair, this placement in the ranking is absolutely nothing to scoff at, and I do still want to emphasize the fact that the film is still good in my mind. But I'm sorry, some parts of the movie really didn't work for me this time, and I may as well get the negative stuff out of the way first. I think that the main thing which didn't hold up for me on this rewatch was the fact that there's not really much to latch onto within this movie, outside of the main Hiccup and Toothless dynamic. Whilst this dynamic has always been a core part of this trilogy, the other movies were nonetheless always able to balance it out with plenty of other great character moments, which thus gave the films more depth. The first movie was primarily about Hiccup's relationship with Stoic, and the second movie introduced Valkyrie into the mix, and it also contained some truly hard-hitting emotional gut punches. These movies had a lot going for them character-wise, and these moments were often unrelated to the dragon stuff, which thus gave the films more variety, I feel. It made every scene stand out to me in different ways, and I loved the contrast between the cool dragon stuff and the more emotional human stuff. But The Hidden World doesn't have enough of those moments for me, and I'd say that it easily has the worst character stuff from the whole trilogy. It doesn't really introduce any new major faces outside of the villain, with most of the content being lifted straight from the second movie. But even if they wanted to focus on familiar faces, it didn't work for me as many major characters are sidelined hard here. Now yes, I didn't exactly mind spending less time with some of these characters because the annoying side characters like Rough and Tough are without a doubt my least favourite part from the trilogy, but I nonetheless take issue with the fact that people who I do actually like, such as Valka, feel like they have nothing to do half the time. Because Stoic isn't in this movie, I really thought that Valka could act as the character to replace him and provide for a strong emotional dynamic with Hiccup. But she doesn't really do that. Instead, she just kind of blends in with everyone else, and that really irritates me honestly. Thankfully, Astrid is so much better, as she actually gets to have plenty of nice moments with Hiccup, such as the one where she talks about how much Hiccup has helped her change for the better. However, outside of that, I just feel like this film is lacking a lot of the same substance as the other two films, because it doesn't have the same level of character moments, and as a result, it just makes this film less interesting and a bit boring on a rewatch, as there's a lot less to latch onto outside of the main plot points. Although, that's not to say this film doesn't have emotion, as there is still the ending. An ending which I previously sang my praises for, but now my feelings are complicated. The thing is, I like Toothless and Hiccup parting ways, and I'll explain why a little bit later. But I really don't get why every dragon had to leave for the Hidden World. I mean, I know they say why in the narrative, but I still don't get it as it completely contradicts the second movie, which showed how much stronger and better it was for the humans and dragons to live together in harmony. It directly showed the positivity in unity. So, if that's the case, why is the conclusion to this film that the humans and dragons should be segregated again? I don't really get it. Like, they do explain it within the film, but as I said, it just clashes so hard with what the last movie had to say. It's just an annoyance that I noticed on this rewatch which caused me to find the ending less effective, and that, alongside the lack of good character stuff beforehand, both really let down this film for me on this rewatch. But that's pretty much the extent of my criticisms. There's still pretty big flaws which contribute to the overall experience being occasionally uninteresting or confusing, but in spite of that, I will still concede that the rest of this movie absolutely slaps. Whilst the stuff with the side characters was disappointing, the main stuff with Hiccup and Toothless is just as amazing as what came before. First of all, they still have plenty of badass and cute moments together, which is always great to watch. And I also particularly loved that scene where Toothless is trying to woo the Light Fury, with Hiccup on the side acting as his wingman in a way. It was great, and it perfectly shows how unique yet endearing their dynamic is, and how much it has truly evolved from the Boy and the Beast dynamic of the first movie. Now, they're pretty much just acting as casual friends, and it's great to see. But the main reason for why I love Hiccup and Toothless' dynamic within this movie specifically, is because I love the way that it has evolved from how it was before, as both characters are now maturing. I think that it's a neat parallel that Toothless finds love within this movie, just as Hiccup is confronting his own ideas of marriage. It's a great way to show that both characters are considering the possibility of settling down and starting a family, which will obviously require them to mature more. And this idea of growing up was also nicely set up in the previous movie with Hiccup becoming chief. And I think it's for this reason that I still love Hiccup and Toothless parting ways at the end. You see, this parting made sense, the others did not. It makes sense that as Hiccup and Toothless both grow up, their lives will grow apart from each other as they find new responsibilities and better places where they belong. It's a really sweet journey of growth and maturity, which helps to give this movie a strong sense of finality, which makes it very satisfying to watch after the first two films. In fact, I think there's many other examples which I can think of, which also help to make this film feel like it has a strong sense of finality to the series, such as with the payoff of Toothless' drawing, which has evolved from incoherent squiggles in the first movie, to a legitimate drawing in this movie. Once again, it's just really satisfying to see this change over time. And alongside the great main character dynamic and the strong sense of finality felt, I think that many other parts of this film work really well for me, thanks to the villain, Grimmel, who is hands down the best villain of the trilogy, and it's not even close. Not only is he oftentimes incredibly intimidating and compelling, I mean that scene in the house is fantastic, but I also think that he's an interesting character within the context of this trilogy, because when you think about it, he's sort of like the anti-Hiccup. Both men were successful in shooting down a Night Fury, which is a near impossible task, may I remind you. But the main difference between them is that Hiccup showed compassion and spared the Night Fury, whilst Grimmel went on to become the Night Fury Killer. It makes it feel like Grimmel is the kind of person that Hiccup would have become if it wasn't for his compassion. That's just really interesting to think about, and it makes Grimmel a much more fascinating villain, as villains are always much better when you can create a connection between them and the hero. So yeah, I still think that there's plenty of interesting ideas within this movie which help to give it some substance. just not as much substance as the previous films. And alongside these good moments and ideas, the action and cinematography is still phenomenal, the animation looks super good, especially in the titular hidden world, and the music is still incredible. I especially loved that moment where the main theme kicked in as the Light Fury saved Hiccup at the end. Oh man, that bit was so cool, it gave me goosebumps for sure. So overall, I still like the hidden world, even if I no longer love it. The main stuff which the film chose to focus on was fantastic and compelling and immensely satisfying, but the additional stuff which would normally elevate the film further just wasn't quite there for me, and the sidelining of Valka, as well as my usual issues with this trilogy, such as rough and tough making me want to die, all contribute to this film not ranking that much higher. So yeah, I don't love this movie, but I don't hate it either, and I would happily go back to it. It's just that the other two movies in the trilogy are a lot better. But still, How to Train Your Dragon is a movie trilogy with no bad entries for me, and I think that is still worth a lot of praise, as that oftentimes isn't the case. I am still so glad that this movie exists, as I think that it ended the trilogy off nicely.
Dog? Still alive?
Have you guys ever heard of this obscure little indie director called Tim Burton? You all know him, right? He was the guy who was probably responsible for the single biggest surge of emos in history. He's that guy who used to make a lot of really creative and unique films, before he fell off and made a load of crappy remakes. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is still a banger though, and better than the Gene Wilder film, and no, you will not change my mind on that. And as a result of these less than popular films, he's a director who used to be pretty beloved but is now looked back on with a lot less fondness. Yeah, I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about now. So, Tim Burton is certainly a very interesting filmmaker to talk about, as he's got an incredibly unique style to him. A style which I know many people hate for various reasons, and believe me, he is not the only director with a divisive style who I will talk about on this list. But, no matter what you may personally think of him and his style, you can't deny the fact that he's definitely unique, and for me personally, I quite like Burton as a director. Is he a favourite of mine? Definitely not, as I do have my fair share of issues with a lot of his films. But when this man hits, he really hits, and to me, he's responsible for some of the most creative and entertaining movies out there, like Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. On the whole, I really love Burton's world building, I think he's got a pretty great dark sense of humour, and contrary to what others may think, I personally believe that there is plenty of substance and heart within his films, so I definitely disagree with the style of a substance argument. I mean, I will still agree that for some of his films, the style of a substance argument is definitely true, but for the most part, I like Burton's work. I've seen all of his movies, and so I can confidently say that he's got a pretty decent filmography on the whole, so long as you ignore Planet of the Apes, Alice in Wonderland, and Dumbo. And, of course, as I'm sure many of you know by now, my opinions on Burton are kind of elevated by the fact that he directed Ed Wood, which, if you don't know, is one of my personal top 3 favourite films of all time. Seriously, you all need to watch this movie right now. If you haven't seen it, pause this video, go to wherever it's on, I think it's on Disney Plus at the moment, and watch this masterpiece. I don't even care if you hate Burton. This film is the least Tim Burton-y movie he's ever made due to it being based on a true story about another director, so you'll probably get on with it a lot more. It's just a pure-hearted, wholesome, funny, informative, inspiring masterpiece in every way, with stellar direction and S-tier performances from Johnny Depp as Ed Wood, and especially Martin Landau as Bela Lugosi, and every creative person should watch it. I have since based my entire personality around this movie, and it's helped me in ways which I can't even begin to describe. I just love it to bits. Oh, and alongside watching this biopic, I would also highly recommend watching the real Ed Wood movies alongside it, such as Plan 9 from Outer Space. Not only does it make the biopic more rewarding, but the films themselves are just an absolute blast to watch in a so bad they're good way. I mean, just look at that no-budget plane cockpit! Look at it! It's truly iconic. But to be fair, Glenn or Glenda is unironically really good and a way more progressive story about gender identity than Amelia Perez, despite coming out over 70 years earlier. Just stop listening to me. Watch all of these movies. Now! Wait, what was I doing again? Oh yes, Tim Burton. Sorry for that long introduction to this segment. I just can't help myself whenever I get to talk about Ed Wood. But anyway, back on track. The reason for why I decided to talk about my thoughts on Burton as a whole before I talk about one of his films is because he's one of those auteur directors whose creative voice is a major part of every film he works on, Ed Wood excluded. This therefore means that I'm much more likely to be positive towards his 2 movies on this list because I like his style. And I equally feel like other people, particularly Burton haters, probably won't like these films as much, so we'll definitely have to agree to disagree on these films. Anyway, the big question which you're probably asking is which of Burton's 2 films eligible for this list goes in this slot on the ranking? Well, if you couldn't already tell from the meme transition, I personally think that Frankenweenie is the ever so slightly weaker of the 2 films. However, I do still like it a lot. I thought that was a really great homage to classic horror films, whilst also being a creative story in its own right with plenty of cute moments. Although, like a fair share of other Burton films, I do have my fair share of issues here. For me, there were two main things that I wasn't really mad on here, and these were some parts of the plot and some of the messages. Whilst the main story itself all about Victor Frankenstein,
it's pronounced Frankenstein,
bringing his dog back to life is a very cute and creative one, the wider narrative gets a bit messy by the third act. You see, in the final act, all of the other school kids attempt to bring back various dead animals like Victor did with Sparky, but instead, they end up creating these mutant monster things which need to be defeated. And how are they defeated? Well, for some of them it's reasonable. This little whatever this is stepped on, the freshwater sea monkeys are killed by salt, and the vampire cat is killed by a freaking stake through the heart in a burning windmill. Wow, that's a bit extreme and graphic. In fact, that just reminded me of something I want to say. Justice for Mr. Whiskers. That poor cat did not deserve any of this. It was an innocent victim at the end of the day. Anyway, these methods of defeat all made sense to me. But for some reason, the rat and the tortoise were defeated through electricity. You know, the thing which brought them back to life in the first place. That makes literally no sense, and you can't just say that the electricity was too strong for them to survive, considering the fact that we were shown that Sparky's electrical pulse wasn't enough to kill the other dog when she touched it. All it did was create a funny Bride of Frankenstein reference, so why did it kill the rat? In my mind, it seems like the equivalent would be me dying if I took a sip of water, despite the fact that I can only live because of water. Oh well, doesn't matter. This is just a minor plot hole, all things considered. My bigger problem with the film, however, comes in the form of the mixed messaging by the end. You see, Victor brought Sparky back to life because of his grief. He misses his dog, his only friend, and so he decides to break the laws of nature to be with him again, instead of just, you know, moving on. Men will literally bring their dogs back to life rather than go to therapy. Actually, you know what? That's fair enough. However, Victor's desperation to bring his dog back led to drastic consequences for the rest of the town, due to it inspiring many poor man's imitations of the experiment. So, surely this should be an implication to him that he shouldn't mess with the dead, and should instead let his dog rest in peace after he dies again by the end. But no, Sparky is brought back to life once again at the end, happy as Larry. Okay, fine, whatever. It's just that I feel like the message of this film wanted to follow something along the lines of this Jurassic Park quote.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Just because Victor is clever enough to bring his dog back to life, doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right or healthy thing to do. Yet, by the end of the film, Victor gets exactly what he wants instead of moving on, so it feels like he hasn't really grown as a person. But then again, I have also heard a valid counterpoint which says that Victor deserved to keep Sparky because he loved him. All of the other experiments failed because the heart wasn't in the right place, just as the Martin Landau science teacher said. Yet Sparky was okay in the end because Victor was the only one who truly cared. It's a valid point, but I still personally feel quite conflicted on this ending. Anyway, that's enough of my criticisms, because I did still really enjoy a lot of this movie, and I want to talk about what I did love. In spite of my grievances with the ending, I do find Victor and Sparky's bonds really sweet here, and you can't help but empathise with Victor's desire to reunite with the one true friend in his life. And you also can't exactly blame him for not making other friends elsewhere, as all the other kids in this movie are horrible. Besides Elsa. We like Elsa. She's cool. Plus, she's played by Winona Ryder, which is pretty awesome. I also think that this film becomes that bit sweeter when you are made aware of the fact that it is actually a feature-length adaptation of a short film which Burton made back in the 80s. I just thought that it was cool that he was willing to revisit and expand upon an old idea that he had in his younger years, now that he's got a bit more filmmaking experience. And alongside being a cute film to watch, I also just find it really fun in a lot of ways. The final act especially was absolutely crazy, but a blast to watch in spite of some of its story issues. Although, I have to ask, did you really have to make it so the Asian guy created the kaiju? Like, come on, that was too obvious. Why not make the Augustus Gloop looking kid create it? That would have been way funnier, to be honest. Either way, the final act was great. But in spite of that, I'll admit that I actually found myself getting the most enjoyment out of this film from two other things. First of all, this movie is great because it has Martin Landau as this crazy science teacher. My god, this man was just so gleefully over the top and bonkers, and I absolutely loved him. He is honestly hysterical and so damn memorable, and I love the way that he explains simple things like the lightning strike.
This man is in the way!
In fact, my favourite part of the whole movie was that one scene where he just insulted all the parents for being stupid.
I think the confusion here is that you are all very ignorant. Is that right word, ignorant? I mean stupid.
What a legend. We need more people like him. Although, alongside finding him funny, I still think a major reason for why I do love him is simply thanks to Martin Landau's presence. As I made it pretty clear before, I am obsessed with the Ed Wood movie, and as a result of that, I've actually started to imagine every Tim Burton movie as an Ed Wood movie, and you can't exactly blame me for doing that when Burton purposefully includes intentional references to the Wood classics. And in the case of this movie, because Landau was in Ed Wood giving one of my favourite film performances of all time as Bela Lugosi, I started to imagine this science teacher being played by Dracula himself, and that just made things even funnier, especially when you pair it alongside all of the classic horror references, which was the second main thing which entertained me the most within this movie. Look, I may not be the biggest horror film fan in the world, but I am a fan of classic cinema, and so I still had a blast spotting all the references to the Universal monster movies. I mean, not only were there intentional references to Frankenstein, obviously, as well as the Wolfman, and, of course, Dracula, and not just the Lugosi one, as Victor's parents also watched the Christopher Lee Dracula in one scene, but there's also plenty of other quirky references which I never noticed as a kid. These references mostly came in the form of the character designs, which I used to think were just really weird and creepy as a kid, but now that I'm older, I realise that they are meant to be referencing classic horror characters. I mean, look at this kid. It's Igor, for goodness sake. But my personal favourite design was this kid, as he is straight up built like Boris Karloff. It's great. He even gets wrapped up like a mummy in one scene. You get it? It's a reference to the Mummy movie, specifically the one starring Karloff, not the Brendan Fraser one. So yeah, there's cool Karloff references, although my deepest apologies are extended to Bela Lugosi because it looks like Karloff was referenced a lot more than he was. Sorry about that, Bella.
Fuck you! Karloff does not deserve to smell my shit! That limey cocksucker can rot in hell for all I care!
And all of these homages are made even better by the fact that this movie is even in black and white, which really helps to sell the classic horror vibe. It's obviously a really simple decision, but it adds a lot to the atmosphere here. Plus, it's quite unique to see a modern animated film in black and white. Oh, and speaking of the animation, it obviously looks fantastic here, as you would expect from stop motion. And alongside simply looking great, I also have to say that I think that the medium of animation works really well alongside Burton's unique style, as his films already feel like they belong in an animated world, so now we're just truly taking full advantage of the limitless potential of the medium. And that's just really great to see. Yo, Tim, make more animated movies and less live action remakes, please! Oh, and speaking of which, Tim Burton did not direct The Nightmare Before Christmas, Henry Selick did. This statement has literally nothing to do with anything else here, I just wanted to say it to make sure you all knew. God, this segment has definitely been the messiest one so far. I think it was only like 50% talking about the film itself, and the rest of the time I was just making references to Tim Burton, Ed Wood, and other horror films. Ah well, I think that just shows you that there really isn't that much to talk about in regards to Frankenweenie, and unless you obsess over these references, you probably won't get that much enjoyment out of the film, in comparison to me. But still, it's got a creative story with a good heart, and I personally had a blast with this film. Largely because I'm a nerd.
Care for a little necrophilia?
Oh, and would you look at that? It's the other stop-motion Tim Burton movie. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way towards Corpse Bride as I do with Frankenweenie. It's yet another great film from Timmy, which I liked quite a lot, but I equally wouldn't say that I loved it despite the fact that it seems right up my alley. Once again, it's knocked down a bit for me because of the various flaws that I have. However, I will still definitely say that this film has a lot less wrong with it than Frankenweenie, and that's ultimately the reason for why it's ranked ever so slightly higher. To be honest, the main issue that I had with this film was the whole middle act, as it kinda got a bit boring at points. Now, it definitely did still have its moments, such as Emily's dance in the woods to Danny Elfman music, as that was classic Burton Elfman magic right there, and the scene on the piano was pretty nice, but the pacing really slowed to a halt by this point, as not much seemed to happen outside of Victor moping around in the land of the dead, and after just a few scenes of that, the film was beginning to lose me quite a bit. And alongside my pacing issues, I found the villain really unmemorable, and the twist that he was the one who left Emily for dead was so obvious that even I figured it out. And finally, god, this is probably going to get me so much hate, I didn't care much for the songs. Now granted, the main Corpse Bride skeleton song was an absolute bop, but the rest were really forgettable and kinda samey for me. Luckily, because there aren't that many songs within this film, I definitely didn't find them as much of a buzzkill here in comparison to The Nightmare Before Christmas, a film which I find quite overrated by the way. And funnily enough, that's another film with Danny Elfman songs. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it, I think that Danny Elfman is a pretty overrated songwriter. Now don't get me wrong, I love his instrumental soundtracks, and that is no exception here. The soundtrack for this movie is beautiful in so many scenes like the aforementioned forest dance or the ending scene. However, Elfman's lyric songs rarely do it for me, and that did end up causing some of the musical scenes to drag on a bit. And that probably didn't help with my pacing critique. Anyway, that's enough negativity. I did still like this movie a lot at the end of the day for a variety of reasons, and I want to get on to talking about said reasons. I think that the main thing which I enjoyed here was the sheer creativity of this film. I mean, it's a story about a man who accidentally marries a corpse and gets stuck in the land of the dead with her, even though he's already engaged to someone else. Okay, now that's something which you definitely don't see every day. This film creatively takes what would be a typical love triangle story and adds in a bit of necrophilia to make it much more memorable and creative. Oh yeah, I should probably address that point. Yes, Victor was about to marry a dead woman, which does sound a bit dodgy on the surface. But to be fair, it really isn't as weird as it sounds if you actually watch the movie, so I personally didn't mind. Plus, I love The Shape of Water and that features fish sex, so clearly I don't care too much if a film has what would be seen as a weird ass romance. Either way, this story concept here is creative and the film just runs with its wacky ideas and presents everything in such wildly unique and interesting ways. I once again love the stop motion in this movie, but the thing that I really liked about the animation here was the differing usage of colour. You see, the real world is presented as being grey and drab, whilst the land of the dead is, ironically enough, full of life and really colourful. It's a great way to visually make the two worlds feel distinct from one another, like two worlds should feel. This film also consistently gives us so many memorable sequences throughout, particularly within the final act where all of the dead return to the land of the living in order to attend Victor and Emily's wedding. That was really fun and cool to see. And speaking of which, I have to say that this film is really funny at many points, particularly by its end. I mean, you can't beat the moment where this dude just nonchalantly says,
"There's an eye in me soup."
It's just brilliant. But alongside being creative and entertaining, I also think that there's a lot of really strong plot beats present within this film. As I said earlier, this film is a love triangle at the end of the day between Victor, Emily, and Victoria. However, it doesn't feel too annoying or cliche unlike so many other love triangles. The thing is, the whole love triangle hinges on a grave misunderstanding on Emily's part, but you can't really blame her for her actions because she's been dealt such a bad hand in life that you actually feel bad for her and want her to get with Victor. However, you equally know that Victor can't be with Emily because Victor is engaged and Emily's, dead. Deep down, you know that Victoria is the one for Victor, considering the fact that they're both alive and had a great connection in the scenes they got to share together, just like Victor and Emily had. There's conflicting feelings here for sure, but that's what makes it interesting for the audience. But in the end, Victor nearly ends up marrying Emily instead of Victoria, entirely because of the lies Victor was told regarding Victoria's replacement groom. It's a situation which gets very complicated and very messy very fast, but because of the whole situation around it, there is no one who is truly in the wrong within our main trio by the end, as the film allows you to see all sides of their personality up to this point. And this all culminates within the climax and the resolution, which I thought was fantastic. Emily has the maturity to let Victor be with the one who he should really be with, and this allows Emily to move on herself, and that's just beautiful to see. Now, I know a lot of people say that they wish Victor ended the movie with Emily, and huh? I don't know what you're talking about. Victoria was a way more reasonable choice because, she's not dead. Plus, the two did actually have a connection together, which a lot of people fail to talk about. It's really not out of the question for them to fall in love. Any of you who says that Victor should be with Emily, or hell, Emily should be with Victoria, are completely missing the point of the movie. The whole point is for Victor and Victoria to get together and for Emily to move on. Although, in saying that, the three of them probably could have just been a polyamorous relationship, as that would have satisfied everyone. Anyway, joking apart, I thought that the handling of the romance was really well done. I also think that this movie had a lot of great satire present regarding the concept of arranged marriages. The value of marriage is being wasted as it is being used for financial purposes rather than being a way for people to show their love for each other. For goodness sake, one of the characters literally tells Victor and Victoria that they can't be alone together. What the hell? That's so stupid! But it's sadly accurate, and as a result, it was definitely fun to see Burton take jabs at a stupid system. And the final positive, which I want to mention for this segment, is the voice acting talent. And as you would expect from Tim Burton by now, we've got a lot of his usual go-to faces here.
Get me Johnny Depp and my wife on the phone.
I can't ever not do that.
However, despite being Burton mainstays, I always enjoy seeing actors like Depp and Carter in his films, because they are just talented actors in their own right, with a lot of range to them, and I'm tired of people writing them off just because this is their 50th Burton film. In fact, I'm just gonna say it, I actually think that Johnny Depp is one of my personal favourite actors. In my mind, the dude has mad range to him, and he's always able to make each role feel distinct from one another, so much so that he doesn't even look like the same person half the time. Not to mention, he always feels like he has a great level of enthusiasm for most of his roles, and that always makes him entertaining to watch in my eyes. And this performance as Victor is no exception to this rule, as he was really energetic and entertaining, and I could barely tell it was even Depp behind the mic, which I think is a good thing as it meant I could get more immersed in his character, rather than just thinking of Edward D. Wood Jr. or Willy Wonka or Jack Sparrow or someone. In fact, there's actually another film on this ranking which also features Johnny Depp voicing a character, and so I think that will do a great job at showing how much range the man actually has when I get around to comparing it to this film. And on the topic of the main characters, I'm sorry, but as great as Helena Bonham Carter is, I'll admit that I couldn't stop imagining Emily as Vampiro whilst watching, and I honestly think that image gave me the most amount of enjoyment whilst watching this film. Once again, I can't help but picture every Tim Burton movie as an Ed Wood movie. Seriously, you all need to watch Ed Wood, it's so good. Anyway, I'd say that overall, Corpse Bride is a great movie. I may find the middle pretty uninteresting and the songs forgettable, but there's still a boundless amount of creativity present here, as well as a unique but well-crafted love triangle story with some great disses towards arranged marriages for good measure. I do definitely love robots, but this film absolutely deserved its nomination regardless. Even if it is the weakest film from the 2005 batch, definitely give it a watch, especially if you're a Tim Burton fan. And now, if there's nothing else for me to say, I'll end off this Burton detour by saying, fucking watch Ed Wood already! What are you still doing here? Go watch it, now!
Our house, in the middle of our street, our house.
Whilst I may be done with Burton, I feel like Monster House kind of retains a similar vibe to the movies which I just talked about. It's a very entertaining film which isn't afraid to be a bit creepy and weird at points. However, something tells me that I'm one of only a few people who would rank this movie above the Burton films, although to be fair, the films are kinda neck and neck for me. Whilst I definitely wouldn't call this movie unpopular by any means, as I know many people who love it, I doubt many will rank it as high as I have on this list, as it is definitely flawed at points. But that isn't the case for me, as once again, I have nostalgia bias for this movie. You see, I used to watch this film all the time as a kid, and to be honest, I still frequently rewatch it for Halloween, and as a result of this fact, I often find myself getting more enjoyment out of this film than a lot of other people do, and so I'm personally able to look past many of the major flaws that other people may have with it. Okay, yeah, sure, the animation on the humans ain't great, but it's not a big issue for me, and it's made up somewhat because the house itself is animated flawlessly. Plus, the creepiness of the character designs kinda aids the spooky nature of the film. And as for another criticism which I've seen brought up, I will definitely agree that the police are ridiculously incompetent and kind of annoying within this film. But once again, I don't mind too much as, let's be honest here, it's easily the most realistic part of this movie. And yeah, sure, the plot can be quite weird at points, and you can pick out a fair share of holes of it, like why does the house only occasionally hide from onlookers, and how did no one notice it clambering around the town at the end? However, in all honesty, I really don't care all too much, as this film is just so much fun for me. I always have an absolute blast with it from start to finish. It's got some surprisingly good jokes present, alongside some not good jokes, but the climax is nonetheless absolutely fantastic. It's large scale and consistently exciting. However, the slow-paced scenes leading up to the climax are also really well done, with a great atmosphere and some brilliant tension. Okay, sure, the film can be a little bit too slow in the scenes before they enter the house, but after that, it consistently keeps my attention going right through to the end. Although, whilst I will say this film can be quite tense and engaging at points, it really isn't that scary. Ultimately, this film is more of a comedy than an actual horror, but honestly, I really don't mind. Personally, I love family horror movies like this, as they are always a ton of fun to watch and are still really creative, no matter how cheesy or not scary they can be, and Monster House is no exception. It reminded me a lot of the charm of classic Goosebumps episodes, and that's a large reason for why I liked it. And also, speaking as someone who's a bit of a pussy, I'm not always in the mood to watch a horror film, so I often find myself gravitating more towards these lighthearted and fun spooky stories. However, as I alluded to earlier, not every joke within this movie works for me, and some parts like the stuff with Maggie Gyllenhaal and her boyfriend can be a bit annoying. Also, I genuinely cannot tell you whether I love or hate Chowder. Sometimes he's really funny, and sometimes he's really annoying. There's not much consistency with him, but at least he's good half the time. In fact, on the topic of characters, I don't really think that our protagonists have that much to them. DJ is just kind of the audience self-insert, and Ginny and Chowder only really play the parts of exposition and comic relief without much else going for them. So yeah, as you can tell, in spite of the fun that I can have with this film, there's still a lot that I can criticise with it. However, the film more than makes up for its shortcomings for me thanks to two main things. First of all, there's some great technical attributes. Whilst the animation isn't perfect, I think that the general direction and cinematography is really strong, primarily with the titular house itself, which, as I said before, is presented absolutely flawlessly. Plus, I also have to mention this amazing shot of the window cracking, as it slices just across DJ's neck to show how the house now wants to kill him. That is excellent cinematography right there. And alongside the visuals, the score absolutely slaps, especially the theme used in the climax. However, the main thing which this film excels at for me is the character of Nevercracker, who is just fantastic. Not only is he played by Steve Buscemi, which is an automatic W for me, but he's also an absolutely fascinating character in his own right. He starts out as an antagonist who screams at everyone to get off of his lawn, until he dies of a heart attack after screaming at DJ. Except he's not dead, and he ends up breaking out of the hospital in the climax in order to return to the house, and this is where we learn the truth about the house and Nevercracker's relationship with it. You see, Nevercracker fell in love with a woman called Constance, who was previously used as a circus freak until Nevercracker set her free and built the house with her. Yet, because of how Constance was treated, she acts out in a violent way against some annoying kids, and ends up dying as a result after being buried alive in concrete. Holy shit, that's dark. You know what? I take back what I said about this film not being scary. That death scene was straight up nightmare fuel. Yet after she died, Constance's soul ended up becoming part of the house. So now, Nevercracker is technically married to his house. I guess that brings a whole new meaning to I Got Wood then. Sadly, Constance's aggressive actions towards anyone who comes near her hasn't gone away, and so she turns the house into a monster who will attack anyone. But Nevercracker is nonetheless able to stop Constance from hurting people because he successfully kept everyone away himself. The truth is, Nevercracker wasn't a horrible old man. Instead, he was actually the true hero who is saving everyone in the town by keeping them away from his house. And this twist just brought a whole new fascinating layer to the film, which really encourages a rewatch where you can notice the details which foreshadow it. And this twist also leads to a much more satisfying ending than you would normally expect, as we're made to actually sympathise with Nevercracker after all of his years of hardship. And it's honestly just really great to see the kids support him after his abusive wife has blown up and he can finally move on. On the whole, this was a really satisfying and an incredibly memorable plot point which always stuck out to me ever since I was a kid. It really helped to give this movie a lot more substance, which thus makes it feel like it is much more worth your time. It definitely feels like a lot more than just a fun Halloween movie. So yeah, I enjoy Monster House quite a lot. It's nothing mind-blowing or anything, but it's nonetheless really fun and has some interesting plot beats and brilliant cinematography. And, best of all, it is way better than Happy Feet in terms of the 2006 batch of nominees. Look, I know not everyone likes this movie, but I dare you to try and convince me that Happy Feet is better. Like, come on bro, you just can't. I am joking of course, you are allowed to prefer Happy Feet to Monster House, we're just gonna have to agree to disagree if that's your opinion.